And now people have been cooped up for a long time too, so they're itching to get outside. Okay, we know this. They're itching to get outside.
There is a lot of anger that people are expressing and unleashing against their current governments. We're seeing this in the United States in light of the whole situation revolving around George Floyd. We have been seeing this sort of movement in Mexico against the police and also in France. It's very interesting. All of these people in the United States are protesting about what happened to George Floyd. And you have people in France who are now protesting against police brutality. And they have their own George Floyd story. They are protesting the death of a French Malian man under the hands of French police officers. But the death of this man took place in 2016. And they are bringing this up now as a way to show solidarity with George Floyd. And it's very interesting. It's to me it's like they really are just a bunch of political opportunists who are using this whole moment of tension as a way to advance their own agendas. That agenda is Marxism, socialism, and really some form of civil unrest. Yesterday I talked about ACAB, ACAB. It is an acronym that is used by anti-police activists, and it stands for All Cops Are Bastards. And I knew about this term before the whole George Floyd situation erupted. And I always knew that the whole movement was sinister. In fact, it is a cult. It's like the movement that says we should boycott an entire country. Like, for example, you have a movement that says we should boycott all of Israel. Any Israeli products, boycott it. Which would lead to nothing good. But these people say that all cops are bastards. And what they're really calling for is revolution. What they want is a revolt. And I don't see how any of this sort of thing could lead to anything good. In fact, the people who are saying all cops are bastards, they are generally, at least right now, are within the left-wing strata. These are the hipster types. They are the trendy, edgy, liberal. They hate the police because the police are bad because they don't allow you to skateboard on some public property that somebody had to spend thousands of dollars for, that people had to spend thousands of dollars for. But what's interesting, what's actually ironic, well, actually unironic, really, is that this term, all cops are bastards, has been being used by skinheads for years. This is actually a term used by skinheads. Skinheads have been using this type of talk for years. Skinheads have been saying all cops are bastards. Look it up. Google it. It's a popular term amongst neo-Nazis because they also hate the police. So all of you people who keep saying all cops are bastards, and you guys tout and boast about how you are anti-fascist, what type of result are you going to bring about if you have your revolution? Because a lot of the Right-wing fanatics, well, they're a lot more armed than you are. And there are a lot of paramilitaries who are right-wing. And these guys are former police officers. They are former military personnel. These are veterans. They have the training. They have the resources. And they also have the anger and the will. So what type of a denouement, what end result are you going to bring about if you succeed? Because when you have anarchy, then you have a vacuum, and nature hates a vacuum, which means you are going to have different political factions fighting for power. And you guys, you liberal, leftist, progressives, whatever you want to call yourselves, you guys are either going to lose or you are going to have to adapt and become fascist yourselves. Either by joining the actual fascists or, having power over your own section of society and killing those who you want to kill, just like what happened in the Spanish Civil War. You had pockets of Spain that were controlled by anarchists and Republicans. And yes, the anti-monarchist forces in Spain considered themselves Republicans, and they were very, very evil. But you see all of this anger that is erupting, so much anger. And a lot of this has to do with the lockdown. Now, I support a lockdown in the situation of a pandemic. We have seen the success of the lockdown in several countries. For example, like New Zealand, Greece, the West Bank, also known as Palestine. These countries have seen very few deaths due to coronavirus, and they had lockdowns. Countries that did not have a lockdown were quite devastated, like, for example, Sweden. Denmark had a lockdown, Finland had a lockdown, Norway had a lockdown. Sweden was the only Nordic country that did not have a lockdown, and now they have one of the highest death rates due to coronavirus on Earth. So lockdowns do work. They do curtail the problem, and they do mitigate the situation. But lockdowns can only be truly successful if people have a sense of collectivism. And by that, I mean that they have a sense of community. And they have a volition to do the right thing for the common good being their people, right? Their society, their community, their neighbors. And I don't mean this as a racial thing, I just mean this as a community concept. One thing that the lockdown has demonstrated is that a lot of the first world is not united. France had a lockdown that was very vigorous, but now you have protests in France. And the people who are protesting in France, they're protesting about some event that took place in 2016. Because of George Floyd, they're reviving the story about this African man who was supposedly killed by the cops. I don't know the full story, I don't know the full details of the story, but that's the narrative. And you have had all these people in lockdown, all these people stuck at home, and they're doing something that they're not used to, and they're doing something that they don't really want to do. And now when they leave the house, they have to wear a mask. It's something they don't want to do. I mean, you're asking the French to wear a mask. These are the people who, on both spectrums of the political paradigm of the West, supported the banning of the hijab. You want to tell these people to wear a mask when they hate the hijab? You want to tell these people to wear a mask when they showed contempt for women who wore a burkini on the beach? So these protests are not really just about police brutality. These protests are an unleashing of anger against the state. They are also an unleashing of anger against the so-called elites. Because people who are in the elite, or people who are in the privileged class, or people who work at home, and those people are quite privileged, they have the leisure to say, yeah, wear a mask, stay at home, be safe. But then you have people who have to leave the house to work. You have people who fit under the categorization of essential worker. That's the categorization. And so they have to go to work. There was a heartbreaking story that I read this morning. It was about a woman who worked as a janitor at an elderly healthcare clinic. If I'm not mistaken, that's what it was. And she got coronavirus and she died. And so it brings up the issue of how do we protect essential workers? Because it is extremely important. It is unfair that you have a section of the society that can stay home at their leisure, while other people have to be forced to work to make a living because they have no other way to make a living. It is unfair. And I do not agree with this system. I think this system is corrupt. It's broken. And I think this system needs to be mitigated and reformed in a balanced, peaceful way. There needs to be some sort of government assistance to help people in times of crisis. Because if we are a united nation, if we are a country like what the Pledge of Allegiance says, you know, we all pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States. And if we are a united nation, we have to act as a community. We all pay taxes. We all pay taxes. Well, at least we're supposed to all pay taxes. But, you know, we pay taxes. And we pay taxes because as a country, as a nation, we agree that we are citizens of a country. And therefore, we have to all pitch in, we have to all contribute financially to the welfare of the country. It's like a church. You know, a church is a church because people agree that it's a church. We agree that, you know, the body of Christ agrees this is a church. And so we go there and it's a church. A church could be anywhere from a building to a subway. It could be, a small store. It could be somebody's house. We agree that it's a church. And once we agree that it's a church, then we agree that we are a community, and we agree that we have to contribute to the existence of this church. It's the same thing with a country. A country, you know, it's not just a piece of land. I mean, land is conquered, and once the land is conquered, the invaders then determine what country that land is, or what country that land belongs to, what empire that land belongs to. Countries are social constructs. Countries, nations, the tribes, these are all social constructs. It doesn't make them bad, but it's just the reality. They're social constructs. They exist in the collective conscience of a particular people. And if we all agree that we are Americans, then we're Americans. If one day the whole population of Louisiana agrees that they are Louisiana and that they are no longer under the Union, then that's revolution. And that state has seceded. And, you know, you could expect the Union, you could expect Washington, D.C. to do a blitzkrieg on that state. If Quebec decided that they are no longer under Canada, and there were enough people who agreed with that, then you would have a revolution. You would have a revolution. That's why metapolitics are actually more dangerous than regular politics. Metapolitics is, the politics of conscience, the changing of the minds of the masses. That is more dangerous than merely voting, because what precedes a vote is an opinion. So you have to change the opinions of people before you can have something effectively voted for to an advantageous position. So if we are all a country, then we have to agree to help each other. Simple as that. Taxes can't just be for one sector of the country. In our case, it's the military industry. That's what gets tons and tons and tons of money. But there needs to be some sort of system to help essential workers. But what you have now is an unleashing of anger, because, and I understand the opinion, you elites, you wealthy people, you privileged classes, you're telling us to stay home, you're telling us to wear a mask, but yet you aren't forced to go work for a living outside of the comfort of your own home. And so you have an unleashing of rage and anger. Now, this could translate into a major political shift in the paradigm of the West. Because when you have anger, I actually read this somewhere today and I found it to be very astute. Anger always seeks a scapegoat. Anger always seeks someone to blame. And people are going to blame the elites, but they are also going to blame the most defenseless of the society. They're going to blame migrants. They're going to blame immigrants, foreigners. There's going to be a lot of this sort of thing. And so this is what makes this situation so dangerous, is when you have this torrent of rage and anger, then if it continues on and if it escalates, well, you're going to have victims. Because when people are that angry, it's almost like a giant cult. They have this collective consciousness, and it's very corrupt. It's a very corrupt consciousness. And their narrative becomes an idol, and that idol demands sacrifices. And these sacrifices aren't animals. So that's my biggest fear about this whole thing. Anyway, I hope you guys have learned something from this message. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.